This is the Wright Flyer, the plane that made the first successful powered, manned and controlled flight in history. And this is the F-35, the latest and most advanced fighter jet, capable of flying at speeds faster than the speed of sound. The difference between these two planes is just 100 years. That's literally nothing. In this video, I'll talk about the entire history of aviation. I'll explain how we went from kites, hot air balloons and airships to helicopters, propeller planes and jet planes, with some capable of flying at speeds up to 11,000 km per hour. You heard me right. But let's start at the very beginning. The idea of flying is as old as dirt. Like, we're talking about thousands of years ago. Like, literally the legends of Daedalus and Icarus and, all of that stuff. But those were just legends. Humans built something that could actually fly only in the 5th century BC, which is still a long time ago. I'm talking about kites. They're considered to be the first form of a man-made aircraft. And oh boy, people really were doing some crazy stuff with these kites. Like, they were making them look like insects, birds, some mythical creatures, and they were fitting them with whistles, so that they will make sounds while flying. But it gets even crazier, like a lot. Aside from these unmanned toy kites, there were also man-carrying kites, like the kites that could carry humans. You will say, oh, like, what's so crazy about that? Like, that's cool. And I mean, yeah, that's cool. That's until we found out how they use them. They were attaching prisoners to these kites and then launching them off a cliff, like as a punishment. And since those kites weren't designed to land, those prisoners get killed. But anyway, let's talk about hot air balloons. Let's have a quiz. When do you think the first hot air balloon was invented? Like, I'm not talking about manned balloons, and the size doesn't matter, just the earliest hot air balloon. So here are the options. A. 1700s, B. 1600s, and C. 1500s. You can write your answer in the comments if you want. So, are you ready? Well, the correct answer is actually none of these. They are all wrong. The correct answer is 300 BC. Oops. So, sky lanterns. You know them. And I think you know that they are quite old. Like, really old. 300 BC. So, sky lanterns are actually the earliest form of a hot air balloon. By the way, here's something interesting that I learned about them. Usually, sky lanterns are launched during festivals, celebrations, or just for fun. I mean, this is how they were used since 300 BC, and this is still how they are used today. But also, 2000 years ago, like in 200 AD, they were used for military purposes. Guess how? You will probably think of navigation or something like that. But no, the Chinese used them to scare enemy troops. Like, they were launching hundreds of them or even thousands in the hope that the enemy troops will poop their pants because they will see like hundreds of shining objects in the sky. Sounds silly, I know, but I think, like, we're talking about 2000 years ago, like 200 AD. I think it might have actually worked. Okay. Let's talk about the actual hot air balloons. The first balloon capable of carrying humans was launched in 1783 by the Montgolfier brothers, and it looked very beautiful, by the way. The brothers collaborated with a wallpaper manufacturer, which decorated the balloon, and it turned out really sick. Blue background, some gold decorations, zodiac signs and suns with the face of the King of France. During that time, balloons became popular, and not only among civilians, but among the military too. Hot air balloons were used in the French Revolutionary Wars, for example, to observe the movements of the Austrian army during the Battle of Fleurus in 1794, and they were even used in the American Civil War. Also, ballooning was a quite popular sport in the early 1900s Britain. Now, let's talk about airships. We're getting closer and closer to the airplanes. The airships evolved from hot air balloons. I mean, in the beginning they were literally called dirigible balloons. The first powered and controlled flight took place in 1852, when Henry Giffard flew 24 kilometers in France in his steam-powered airship. In 1884, the first fully controlled free flight was made in the French Army electric-powered airship La France. The ship flew 23 minutes and covered 8 kilometers. However, both of these ships were generally short-lived and extremely frail. The airships began to be actively used only in the early 1900s. In 1910, the world's first airline was founded, German D-Leg, which is an acronym for Deutsche Luftschiffahrtsakte. Anyway, it operated a fleet of airships produced by Luftschiffbau Zeppelin Corporation. Jesus, why not just call it Zeppelin Corporation? At first, the company only operated in Europe, but later they launched transatlantic flights. At first from Germany to New Jersey, and then from Germany to South America. Okay, this is the moment you've been waiting for, probably. Let's talk about planes. Specifically, about the 1903 Wright Flyer, the plane that made the first successful powered, manned and controlled flight in history. Let's talk about how this plane worked. The plane had curved wings, so that it will be able to generate lift. The brothers understood that the air travels faster over a curved top and slower over a flat bottom, which is what generates lift. They knew that because they previously worked on gliders. To move the plane, they used two propellers on the back. And here is something interesting. Look how propellers looked on older planes. And then look at the Wright Flyer propellers. At that time, there was a belief that airplane propellers should resemble ship propellers, but the brothers proved that the narrow design was a better choice. The blades were curved, just like the wings, because propellers and wings work on the same principles. Propellers also generate lift, but in a forward direction, which we refer to as thrust. Now, let's talk about the engine. The brothers understood that the plane needed a powerful but relatively lightweight engine in order to fly. The problem though was that all the powerful enough gas engines that existed at the time were quite heavy. So the brothers had no other choice but to build their own engine. They calculated that they needed at least an 8 horsepower engine with a weight of no more than 90 kilograms. They were able to make a 12 horsepower engine that weighed 80 kilos. To reduce the weight, they made the crankcase of an engine out of aluminum, which at the time nobody else was doing. To hide that from their competitors, they painted the crankcase so that they wouldn't be able to see which material they used. By the way, look at these chains which connect the engine to the propellers. Those were actually bicycle chains. And that's not a coincidence. Before working on planes, the Wright brothers were bicycle mechanics/engineers. They owned a bike shop called the Wright Cycle. Also, look at this thing. Since they were testing the plane in sandy terrain, they understood that the plane won't be able to reach the necessary speed for takeoff in such conditions. So they put a rail, which they used for takeoff. All of this stuff allowed the plane to get into the skies. But that's only half of the story. They faced another challenge. They needed to make the plane controllable, which at the time nobody really achieved. To control the plane up and down, they installed an elevator in the front. It was controlled by a rope, one end of which was attached to the elevator and the other to the stick, which the pilot used for control. In modern planes, such elevators are placed on the back. You can see it here. To steer the plane, they were literally twisting the wings, like there were cables attached to the wings and to the sting where the pilot was lying. The pilot, by moving their body left and right, could control the twisting. It was called wind warping. Needless to say, it was actually not the best way to control the plane. The plane was really unstable and very difficult to fly, but it still worked, so... There are of course a lot of other cool things about this plane. I mean, this plane is really interesting, but I think it will take too much time to explain everything. This plane deserves its own separate video. Maybe I will make it one day. Subscribe not to miss it. So, during this time, in the early 1900s, planes were getting more popular and more advanced with each day. The military started to use them, which definitely increased the speed of innovation. Planes were used both in the First and Second World Wars, and of course in pretty much all the wars after that. After the Second World War, commercial aviation grew rapidly. The plane manufacturers, which previously were focused primarily on the military planes, started producing commercial aircraft. Planes like the Douglas DC-3 appeared, which popularized air travel in the US. But the plane that truly changed everything in commercial aviation was the Boeing 707. It could fit more passengers than the previous planes. It could fly longer distances, and it was faster. It was the plane that started the jet age. The plane had a significant cultural impact. It literally became the American cultural icon. But the plane wasn't popular just in the US. It was a worldwide sensation. Companies like Qantas, Singapore Airlines, Air France, Lufthansa, and a bunch of others started flying 707s. The next plane that made a significant impact in the airline industry was the Boeing 747, the world's first jumbo jet. It carried significantly more passengers than all the previous planes. For example, the 707 could carry 200 passengers, while the 747 could carry 600 passengers in an all-economy cabin. Also, the plane was much more fuel efficient, which allowed to significantly lower the ticket price, which in turn made air travel much more accessible and affordable. The 60s and 70s were really good decades for aviation, as a whole. The first human in space, the first humans on the moon, the speed records were getting crazier and crazier. For example, in 1967, the X-15 set the airspeed record for an aircraft at 7,296 kilometers per hour. That's insane. In the 80s, the plane started to get smarter and smarter. There was a whole digital revolution in the aviation industry. Fly-by-wire was introduced, which replaced the conventional manual flight controls with an electronic interface. It made planes much safer, as it simply wasn't allowing the pilots to make dangerous maneuvers. Also, it reduced the weight of the planes, which in turn allowed them to carry more passengers or fuel. Military planes also improved significantly. F-16 was introduced in 1978, which is still a very capable plane. And yeah, that brings us to today, to F-35, the most advanced fighter jet in history. It's filled with some crazy technology, like it has some real advanced sensors and so on, and of course it can fly faster than the speed of sound. I should definitely make a video about this plane. It's mind-blowing. Thank you for watching. See you soon.